All right, so let's get some definitions in here, right? What is this gross domestic product thing? So it is the value of all the final goods and services produced within a country in a given year. I mean, I guess you could talk about the GDP of something that's a decade or something, or a month, but yeah, for the most part, it's a year. So there's a few different parts of this that we want to break out. Okay, first thing is value. Why are we talking about value? What does it mean by value? So let's think about it. We're talking about goods and services we're producing, right? We're talking about oranges and apples and hats and haircuts and pedicures and stuff like that, right? Would it make sense to just add up the number of apples and oranges and hats that we produced in a certain year? No, right? So instead, we look at the value of it, right? We look at the dollar value of it. And that's pretty much just so that we don't have an apples to oranges kind of comparison, right? That everything's on the same, everything is using the same units, right? So instead of 6 apples plus 7 oranges plus 18 hats, it's like, how do you add those up? We just add up the monetary value of all of them. So this is the dollar value of all of the, and the next important part is the final goods and services, right? So we'll talk about this explicitly, and we'll talk about what are called intermediate goods and services, right? But, just think about, building a house or fixing a house, right? The person goes to Walmart or goes to Home Depot, and you guys are passing notes now. That's better than whispering. That's good. So the value of all the final goods and services produced. So when you go to Home Depot, when you go to Lowe's or somewhere like that, you are usually buying stuff for, the final goods or services. You're buying a new toilet seat or something, right? Or you're buying a new shower curtain or whatever, right? But, if you're a contractor, if you're a remodeler, you're going there to buy a new sink that you are then going to turn around and charge somebody else for, right? And so that new sink that a contractor buys isn't going to be a final good or service. It's going to be an intermediate good or service. Similarly, if I go to Walmart and I buy coffee beans, that's a final good or service to me. But if Bean Broker goes to Walmart and buys coffee beans, or if Bean Broker buys coffee beans to whoever their distributor is, that's an intermediate good or service, and it's not going to be counted in GDP. Because what happens if we count that, then we'll end up with double counting. And at the end of the day, we want to get as decent and as accurate a measure as possible. And we know it's imperfect. The most laughable thing of this whole thing is that gross domestic product is estimated down to the penny, which is just insane to me because we have no idea. This is all guesswork. You know what I mean? So the fact that they, have the confidence to estimate it down to the penny always makes me laugh. We're trying to get our best approximate version of how well we're doing as an economy. How well are we, how much are we producing compared to last year? So it's all the final goods and services. We don't want to use intermediate goods and services because we will have double counted. This is going to be within a country. So there has to be some sort of geographic bound, right? We could talk about global GDP, but we pretty much never do. We also could talk about state GDP, but we pretty much never do. So when we talk about GDP, it's always talking about nations or countries, right? But essentially, whenever you have a measure like this, a flow measure, you have to have a geographic bounds, and then you also need to have a time boundary, right? So within a given year. So this is not a stock of something, right? Like if you think about your checking account or your savings account, that's a stock of the amount of money that you have, right? And then every month you get, paid or something like that, right? That's a flow that goes into your checking account, right? Every time you get money, that's a flow into your checking account, and your checking account is the stock. This thing right here, GDP, this is a flow, right? This is a yearly measure that happens, between January of 2023 and December of 2023, right? If I asked you, what's the GDP on March 29th, 2023, that doesn't make any sense, right? If I asked you about a stock measure, like what's the national debt for the United States on March 29th, 2023, that does make sense. I can tell you what the national debt is right now. But I can't tell you what the GDP is for today because the question doesn't even make that much sense. So anytime we're talking about flows, it has to be over a period of time. Anytime we're talking about stocks, you can just say at this particular moment, this is what the stock is. So we split GDP up into different parts. So there's this very famous equation that you're going to see over and over again. So we represent GDP with Y. So this is our GDP. And this is going to be equal to all of our consumption plus all of our investment plus all of our government spending plus, and then here's where it gets a little bit tricky. We can talk about this a couple different ways. We can say plus our net exports, or if we wanted to expand that net exports, we could say plus, open parentheses, our exports minus our imports. So our consumption is, a pretty significant chunk of our economic activity here in the United States. I think it's like 70%. Investment is around 15%. Government spending, again, around 15%. Well, it's probably, let's say, it's probably around 20% these days, honestly. And then our net exports are usually, if you've done the math correctly, 70 plus 15 plus 20% equals 105. So in order for this to make 100%, this has to be negative, and yes, this is usually negative. So it's usually about negative 5%, something like that. We are almost always importing more than we are exporting. It's very, very rare that we are not. So our consumption is about, 2/3, a little bit more than 2/3 of the GDP, and it moves very little over time. The business investment, hovers around 15%. It increases and declines a bit more than consumption. Government spending is pretty standard, pretty flat, and net exports also pretty flat. So what we can do is, real quick, so